He never suspected the woman he adored was living under an alias. Not when she kissed him goodnight. Not when she shared his last name. Not even when she stood over his body, dialing 911 with shaking hands and tearful gasps. To the outside world, Grant Whitmore was living the dream, a quiet life in suburban Pennsylvania with a beautiful wife, a well-kept home, and a future that seemed as stable as the man himself. He paid his taxes on time. He coached Little League. He brought his wife coffee every morning with a handwritten note. He trusted her. Until one quiet evening, when trust turned into tragedy, and love became a liability. What if the person lying next to you every night wasn't who they claimed to be? What if the life you built together was balanced on a lie so deep, it was older than your entire relationship? Would you walk away quietly? Or would you try to expose the truth, even if it meant risking everything? In April 2022, a respected man was found dead in his home, bludgeoned with a marble bookend. His wife claimed it was a break-in. Police nearly believed her, until they checked his email and found one chilling line: "If anything happens to me, start here. My wife isn't who she says she is." What followed wasn't just a homicide investigation. It was the unraveling of a second identity, a decades-old mystery, and a woman who had spent her adult life erasing her past. She had changed her name. She had moved across state lines. She had disappeared into a new identity. And when that identity began to crumble, someone paid the price, with their life. This isn't just a story about murder. It's about obsession. Identity. And how far someone will go to keep secrets buried. Because once you dig into a past that someone's tried to forget, you may not like what you find. And in this case, one man never lived to tell the story. From the outside, they looked like the couple everyone wanted to be. Grant Whitmore, 42, wore respect like a tailored suit. He was a finance director for a regional credit union in Chester County, Pennsylvania, a numbers guy with a soft heart. Neighbors said he was the kind of man who shoveled the sidewalk for elderly neighbors without being asked, showed up to every Little League game with orange slices and Gatorade, and still held his wife's hand in public like a teenager in love. He grew up in a middle-class family. His father was a retired school principal, his mother a nurse. Grant followed a straight path: college, MBA, solid job, the kind of man who always returned the shopping cart, even in the rain. Then came Marissa. They met in 2009 at a local charity gala. Grant had been dragged there by a coworker. Marissa was photographing the event. She moved like someone out of step with the world, quiet, graceful, observing more than participating. She had long auburn hair, a guarded smile, and eyes that didn't quite match her expression, like she was always somewhere else. Grant was captivated. She was unlike anyone he'd dated, artsy, elusive, complex. Where he was predictable, she was unreadable. Where he was stable, she was passionate. She told him she was a freelance photographer from upstate New York, an only child, raised by an aunt after her parents died in a car crash when she was young. Her life, she said, had taught her to treasure beauty, to live quietly, and to keep moving forward. He never asked for details. Maybe he didn't want to ruin the magic. Enjoyed the twists and turns. Hit that like button, subscribe for more, and share this story with someone who loves true crime as much as you do. They married in 2010. No one from her past attended the wedding. She said they'd grown apart, that she'd moved too many times to keep in touch. Grant didn't push. He was just happy she said yes. The first few years were good. They bought a house with a wraparound porch, 2 golden retrievers, and matching silver SUVs. Marissa's photography career picked up steam: local weddings, maternity shoots, real estate gigs. Her work had a nostalgic, almost haunting quality. People said she could make a strip mall look like a moment frozen in time. They took wine tours in Napa, hiked in Vermont, posted tasteful pictures on social media that seemed pulled from a catalog. Friends called them #couplegoals. Strangers commented on how lucky they were. But behind the curated smiles, time chipped away at something important. By their 10th year of marriage, subtle shifts began to show. Grant noticed that Marissa had developed strange habits, paranoia that didn't match their reality. She triple-checked the locks at night, kept a flashlight under the bed, and insisted on keeping the blinds drawn even during sunny mornings. He tried to joke about it, but her reactions weren't playful. She'd snap or withdraw, accusing him of not taking her anxiety seriously. At first, he chalked it up to stress, creative burnout, maybe something from her past surfacing. She never talked much about her childhood, only that it was chaotic. Still, Grant worried. He suggested therapy. She refused. Around this time, she began spending long hours away from home. She'd claim it was shoots, editing work, meetings with clients. But when he'd offer to join her on a job or pick her up after a session, she'd insist she needed space. Grant respected that, for a while. Then came the late-night phone calls. Sometimes he'd wake to find her whispering in the kitchen, phone pressed tight to her ear, eyes darting to make sure he didn't hear. One night, he caught a fragment of conversation that clung to him like smoke. "I told you, if he ever finds out, it's over. I won't let that happen." He didn't confront her, not directly. But the next morning, she kissed him on the cheek, poured him coffee, and acted like nothing had happened. That contrast disturbed him more than the words themselves. She had also started locking one specific drawer in her home office, one she'd previously used for photo negatives and memory cards. When he asked about it, she said she was working on a surprise gift and didn't want him to peek. He smiled and pretended to believe her. By February 2022, Grant was no longer sure who he was living with. He noticed that she'd rented a storage unit across town. She told him it was to keep bulky backdrops and lighting equipment from cluttering the house. When he offered to help her move things in, she grew agitated, almost panicked. "No. I've got it. It's just, too many fragile things. I need to organize it first." He didn't argue, but the unease didn't go away. Grant's personality had always leaned toward problem-solving. Quietly, methodically, he made a decision. In early March, he hired a private investigator. Not to catch her cheating, he didn't think that's what it was, but because something wasn't adding up. Something deeper. What the investigator uncovered shattered every assumption Grant had about his wife. There was no Marissa Alden before 2010. The woman he married had no credit history, no school records, no digital footprint before that year. Her social security number was registered in 2010. Her backstory, it turned out, was a carefully constructed lie. Through DMV records and fingerprint analysis, the PI traced her identity back to a woman named Rachel Marin Hastings. The name meant nothing to Grant. But the file he received told a different story. Rachel Hastings had a sealed juvenile record. Arrested at 19 for check fraud. Raised by a single alcoholic mother, bounced between foster homes and group housing. But the most disturbing detail, she'd once been questioned in connection with the 2008 disappearance of a man named Silas Drew, her boyfriend at the time. A volatile man with a criminal record, prone to violence. He vanished one summer night. His car was found abandoned near the Delaware River, keys still in the ignition. Rachel was brought in for questioning, but the case went cold due to lack of evidence. Weeks later, she disappeared from the grid, no forwarding address, no employment record, no trace. Until she became Marissa. Grant didn't sleep that night. He copied everything, police records, court summaries, interview transcripts, and stored them in a fireproof safe in the garage. He sent a digital copy to his work email and, in a move of desperation, drafted a message to his lawyer, "If anything happens to me, start here. My wife isn't who she says she is." He hadn't decided how or when to confront her. Maybe he never would have. But someone else made that decision for him. 3 days later, the safe was left wide open. The documents were gone. Something in the air changed after that. Marissa started watching him, really watching him. Her tone shifted. Her patience ran thin. She accused him of spying, of judging her, of trying to control her. He tried to calm her, to steer the conversation away from blame. But she was no longer interested in talking. By April 12, 2 days before Grant's death, co-workers said he looked pale. Distracted. He asked IT to secure his email and change all his login credentials. One colleague said he asked for recommendations on security cameras. But it was too late. Because Marissa already knew. And whatever survival instincts had protected her for the past decade were about to be tested one more time. April 14, 2022, started like any other Thursday. Grant Whitmore's garage door opened at exactly 6:45 a.m. His security camera caught the familiar sound of tires backing over the cracked driveway as he left for work. He waved at a neighbor walking her dog, a quiet, habitual gesture. But Grant never made it to the office. By 10 a.m., co-workers began to grow concerned. He wasn't answering his phone. His calendar showed back-to-back meetings, including one with a board member. By noon, the HR manager drove by his house, thinking perhaps he'd fallen ill. What she found was eerie. The house was locked. No car. No response. But the curtains were all drawn tightly, something she'd later tell police felt oddly, deliberate. At 4:36 p.m., Marissa Whitmore placed a calm, steady-voiced 911 call. "I just got home from a shoot, and I found. I think my husband's been attacked. There's blood. A lot of blood. He's not breathing." The dispatcher asked her to stay on the line. Marissa, however, hung up. When Chester County deputies arrived at 4:49 p.m., they found the front door unlocked. A heavy silence hung in the air. The living room was immaculate, untouched. But down the hallway, the master bedroom told a different story. Grant's body lay partially covered on the floor beside the bed. His shirt was soaked with blood. A kitchen carving knife was embedded in his chest, still lodged between the third and fourth ribs. There were defensive wounds on his forearms and hands, indicating he tried to fight back. Every story like this deserves to be heard. If it moved you, help it reach more people, like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear the truth. But what stunned officers most, was the lack of chaos. There was no sign of forced entry. Nothing had been stolen. No drawers ransacked. No broken glass. It looked like Grant had been murdered by someone who wasn't afraid of being seen. By someone who belonged there. Marissa stood in the hallway, wrapped in a gray cardigan, arms trembling. I found him like this," she said. "I swear, I don't know what happened." She claimed she'd been out all morning photographing a maternity shoot at the Arboretum across town and had only just returned. But her story wavered. She said she'd entered through the front door. Then later, she claimed she came in through the garage. Her timestamps were vague. The officers noted she wasn't crying. Detectives took her in for questioning the same evening. At first, she played the role of stunned widow. He had no enemies. He was quiet. A good man. We were fine, we had some issues, but nothing serious. But under gentle pressure, cracks began to show. She admitted they'd had arguments lately, about money, mostly, and that Grant had grown suspicious, even paranoid. She claimed he thought someone was following him. She said he was acting erratic and talking about hiring private investigators. He was spiraling, she told investigators. I was trying to help. But what she didn't know was that Grant had already shared everything with his lawyer. By the next morning, detectives had obtained the PI's files. Grant had emailed the entire package to his attorney just 3 days before his death, labeling the email, if anything happens to me. The file included documents proving that Marissa Alden was in fact Rachel Hastings. It included a record of her sealed juvenile arrest, her connection to the missing man in 2008, and her fabricated background. More damning, it detailed her recent activities: storage unit rental, unknown phone numbers, strange bank withdrawals. It was enough to raise every alarm. Police obtained a warrant and searched the storage unit she claimed was for photography equipment. Inside, they found no camera gear, no lighting stands. Instead, they discovered multiple prepaid cell phones, a suitcase with over $18,000 in cash, a burner laptop with recently deleted browser history, including search queries like "how to disappear after murder" and "bleach versus luminol detection," and most chilling of all, an old photo album labeled Nashville 2008, containing pictures of a young woman, Rachel, and a man later identified as Silas Drew, the boyfriend who went missing years earlier. The scene was starting to unravel. But Marissa wasn't arrested immediately. Detectives needed to build a timeline. They pulled surveillance from nearby homes and businesses. One camera, across the street, captured something crucial. At 8:13 a.m. on the morning of the murder, Marissa's silver SUV was seen backing out of the garage. This directly contradicted her statement that she'd left before 7. Even more damning was the footage from a gas station 7 blocks away. Marissa was seen buying rubber gloves, bleach, and garbage bags at 8:42 a.m. She said she was prepping for a messy paint project. But crime scene techs found faint traces of bleach in the bathroom drain, and luminol tests revealed blood had recently been cleaned from the kitchen floor, even though Grant's body was found in the bedroom. The theory began to take shape. According to detectives, Marissa had confronted Grant early that morning, likely after realizing he had discovered her past. A struggle ensued. She stabbed him, attempted to clean part of the scene, panicked, and staged her alibi. By the second day of the investigation, the media caught wind. Local headlines blared: "Suburban husband found dead in home, wife wasn't who she claimed to be." Neighbors were in shock. Marissa, the quiet photographer with vintage dresses and polite nods, was now at the center of a murder investigation. Reporters swarmed the cul-de-sac. Journalists dug into Rachel Hastings' past, interviewing former classmates and foster care workers. A clearer, darker picture emerged: instability, manipulation, a pattern of men who went missing or cut ties. Marissa's friends were stunned. "She always said she had a hard childhood," one client told the press. "But I never imagined murder." Forensics confirmed Grant died around 8:20 a.m., within the window Marissa was supposedly out shooting. His blood was found not only in the bedroom but also in a trail leading to the kitchen, suggesting he may have stumbled, tried to escape. Her fingerprints were found on the knife. When questioned, she claimed she had touched it earlier while cleaning. But experts noted the smudges were fresh and matched the pressure pattern of a gripping hand, not a casual touch. On April 18, 4 days after the murder, authorities formally charged Marissa, Rachel Hastings, with first-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and identity fraud. She was arrested at a friend's house, where she was reportedly hiding out and attempting to book a one-way plane ticket under the alias Emily Royce. In her mugshot, she stared directly into the camera. No tears. No fear. Just a haunting, unreadable calm. Her arraignment drew a media circus. Protesters held signs that read, "Justice for Grant." Others speculated wildly online: was she a serial con artist? A black widow? Was there a second body no one had found yet? But one question loomed larger than the rest: why did she kill him now? What triggered her to destroy the very life she had spent so long crafting? And what other secrets had yet to surface? It was the morning of April 18, 2022, when the illusion finally shattered. Authorities had spent the previous 72 hours compiling evidence, analyzing inconsistencies, and connecting a trail of lies that spanned over a decade. At exactly 10:14 a.m., a convoy of unmarked vehicles surrounded a modest ranch-style home in West Chester, Pennsylvania. Officers moved with practiced urgency, forming a perimeter, their eyes locked on the side entry door. And there she was. Marissa Whitmore. Known legally, and now publicly, as Rachel Hastings, stepped outside, a suitcase in one hand and a prepaid phone in the other. Her hair was tied back. Her movements were calm. As if she'd expected this moment all along. She didn't struggle. She didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. When officers read her rights and placed her in the back seat of the cruiser, she simply stared out the window. Cold. Detached. One officer would later describe her expression as eerily neutral. Another called her haunted. Rachel Hastings was booked into county jail and charged with a litany of offenses, the most serious being first-degree murder. The list didn't stop there. Authorities added charges for tampering with evidence, obstruction of justice, fraudulent identity use, and possession of an unregistered weapon used in a felony. The news broke within hours, and the story spread like wildfire. Local news stations scrambled to piece together the identity of this woman who had once graced social media feeds with her picturesque wedding photos. The truth hit hard: Marissa never existed. The woman behind the name was someone else entirely, and her past had finally caught up with her. At the arraignment the following morning, the courtroom was packed. Journalists squeezed into benches. Victim advocates sat silently, holding photos of Grant Whitmore in happier times. Outside, the public gathered, fueled by grief, anger, and curiosity. Rachel stood in the courtroom, wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hands cuffed in front of her. Her voice was barely audible as she entered a plea of not guilty. The words fell like lead in the room, silencing the low hum of murmurs. The prosecution wasted no time framing their case. Grant Whitmore, they claimed, had discovered his wife's secret identity just days before his death. Through a hired private investigator, he had uncovered a past Rachel had buried, one filled with foster homes, multiple aliases, and a mysterious connection to a missing person case from 2008. The same day Grant confronted her about it, he was found dead in their living room. To the prosecution, this wasn't coincidence. It was premeditation. They laid out their narrative meticulously. Rachel had lured Grant into a calm morning conversation. She'd offered him breakfast. She'd worn the same clothes she'd be photographed in hours later. She waited until his guard was down. Then, she struck. They pointed to the bleach bottle found in the kitchen trash can, the attempts to clean the floor, the missing knife set, the strange storage unit packed with documents, wigs, and old photographs. They emphasized the fact that Rachel had nearly escaped before police arrived. She had cash, multiple forms of ID, and a plane ticket to Mexico. This wasn't the behavior of a grieving widow, the prosecution argued. It was the signature of a woman who had killed to protect her secrets. But the defense told a different story. Led by criminal defense attorney Maxwell Drayton, a seasoned trial lawyer known for handling controversial cases, the defense sought to humanize Rachel. They presented her not as a murderer, but as a woman shaped by years of abuse, betrayal, and systemic failure. A girl discarded by the foster care system, manipulated by men, and left to reinvent herself in order to survive. According to the defense, Rachel had never truly been safe, not even in her marriage. They hinted at a growing tension in the household during the weeks leading up to Grant's death. They suggested he had become emotionally volatile after discovering her past, threatening to destroy the life she'd built. There were whispers of control, accusations of blackmail, and vague suggestions of psychological abuse. The courtroom became a battleground, not just over facts, but over perception. Was Rachel a cold-blooded killer? Or was she a traumatized survivor pushed too far? The prosecution brought forth damning evidence. Forensic experts confirmed the angle and depth of the stab wound indicated rage rather than self-defense. A bloody handprint on the hallway wall was matched to Rachel. Her search history, discovered through a forensic sweep of her burner phone, included phrases like, "how to disappear without a trace," and, "countries with no extradition." Even more chilling was Grant's final email to his sister, sent at 6:32 a.m. the morning of his death. In it, he wrote, "If anything happens to me, look into her past. Her real name isn't Marissa." The defense countered with nuance. They claimed Rachel's behavior following the crime, her decision to clean the scene, to flee, was not evidence of guilt, but of panic. A lifetime of hiding had conditioned her to run. She wasn't thinking like a killer, they argued. She was thinking like a cornered animal. As the trial gained momentum, the media transformed it into a national sensation. Every night, talk shows dissected the courtroom footage. One camp portrayed Rachel as a sociopathic chameleon, hiding behind a mask of charm and femininity. The other side labeled her a modern-day tragic figure. Scarred, abandoned, and vilified for simply surviving. The story deepened when a witness was called to the stand, Linda Stokely, a woman from Rachel's former foster home. Linda testified that Rachel had always feared men, and once claimed she'd make sure no man ever left her again. Her statement was delivered with theatrical flair, but under cross-examination, her credibility crumbled. The defense revealed Linda had sold her story to a tabloid for $5,000 and had 2 prior felony convictions. Still, the prosecution used Linda's words to paint a picture, a woman who harbored violent tendencies even before her marriage. But the most unexpected turn came during the 3rd week of trial. Forensic results returned from the storage unit items revealed male DNA on the back of an old photograph. The man in the image, a figure standing in the background of multiple photos, had yet to be identified. He appeared smiling, observing, sometimes too close for comfort. The defense seized on this. They suggested that this man, not Rachel, might be the real threat. They insinuated that Rachel had been running not from guilt, but from this shadow, a figure from her past who may have resurfaced when Grant began asking too many questions. The judge allowed the evidence to be submitted for context, though it wasn't enough to introduce an alternate suspect. Still, it cast a thin veil of doubt over the prosecution's airtight case. The final days of the trial were tense. Every breath inside the courtroom felt weighted. The prosecution made one final push, reminding the jury that whatever Rachel had been running from, she had still chosen to end a man's life. She had options. She chose the knife. The defense, in their closing argument, pleaded for compassion. They acknowledged that Rachel had lied, had run, and had made terrible decisions. But they insisted that none of it proved she had planned to kill her husband. They asked the jury to consider the woman behind the crime, the child who never had a chance, the woman who lived in fear. The jury deliberated for 7 agonizing days. And when they returned, the courtroom was deathly silent. Rachel stood for the verdict, her eyes fixed on the floor. Her shoulders rigid. Her lips pressed into a hard, unreadable line. The verdict was read. Guilty, of murder in the 2nd degree. Not premeditated. Not cold and calculated. But still, guilty of taking a life. Rachel sank into her chair, her face pale, her eyes glassy. No tears fell. The sentence would come later. But the world already had its answer. The courtroom emptied slowly that day. Reporters typed furiously. Protesters outside shifted from fury to a strange, uncertain silence. Justice had been served, or so it seemed. But as whispers of that unknown man in the photo lingered, and as the truth behind Rachel's haunted past remained just out of reach, one thing was clear: this story wasn't finished yet. The trial of Rachel Hastings, once known as Marissa Whitmore, began on a gray October morning in 2023. The air outside the courthouse was brisk, but inside the courtroom, it was electric. Reporters from every major network had shown up. Legal analysts hovered over their notes. Protesters and supporters lined the steps outside, their faces divided by belief, outrage, and curiosity. This wasn't just a murder trial anymore. It was a referendum on identity, trauma, justice, and secrets buried so deep they'd turned poisonous. Inside courtroom 204, the prosecution and defense were locked in a chess match, each move deliberate, each piece carefully positioned. The prosecution opened first. Assistant District Attorney Caroline Mendez took the floor, her voice sharp and composed. She reminded the jury of the brutality of the crime, a single stab wound, deep and deliberate, angled upward into the heart. She pointed to Rachel's attempt to clean the scene, to flee, to erase the trail. This wasn't a moment of fear, Mendez argued. It was a moment of finality. Rachel killed her husband because he knew too much. Then came the evidence. The jury was shown photos of the crime scene. Sanitized, yet still grim. Blood spatter on the corner of a white kitchen tile. A trail leading into the hallway. A single dish of scrambled eggs left untouched on the counter. The prosecution highlighted Grant's last email, sent less than an hour before his death. The words rang through the courtroom like a prophecy: if anything happens to me, look into her past. Her real name isn't Marissa. They played the 911 call, Rachel's voice, trembling, calm, then almost disconnected. And then came the storage unit. Jurors watched in silence as the contents were displayed: wigs, passports, burner phones, and photographs. One photo in particular caught everyone's attention. A younger Rachel, then Lisa Heitman, smiling at a park, and behind her, a man. Unnamed. His face partially hidden in shadow. The same man who appeared in 3 other images, always lingering, always close. The prosecution leaned in. But it was the testimonies that brought the courtroom to a standstill. First came Dr. Elena Brooks, a forensic psychologist. She described the behavioral profile of someone who assumes a false identity, and how such individuals often operate in survival mode, calculating, cautious, manipulative. Rachel, she implied, was not just running from fear, she was constructing a world in which she controlled every variable. Then, there was Grant's best friend, Danny Cross. He told the court that in the weeks before Grant's death, his friend had become paranoid. That Grant feared his wife was spying on him. That he once showed Danny a photo and asked, "Do you think she's capable of killing someone?" Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The defense objected. The judge overruled. The damage was done. The defense began their rebuttal with a starkly different tone. They didn't deny the killing. They didn't even deny the panic afterward. But they asked the jury to consider the broader story, the woman behind the crime. Attorney Maxwell Drayton painted Rachel not as a monster, but as a survivor of unspeakable trauma. He traced her childhood through a series of foster homes, institutions, and abusive guardians. He revealed the detail behind her early life, a life never officially documented, a paper trail scrubbed clean by name changes and sealed records. Then, he dropped the bombshell. A sealed juvenile case from 2007 in Washington state involving a missing foster sibling and a self-defense altercation that was never resolved. The judge allowed limited mention of it, not as fact, but as context. The defense then introduced testimony from Dr. Fiona Lee, a trauma specialist. Dr. Lee testified that Rachel suffered from CPTSD, a form of chronic post-traumatic stress stemming from years of childhood abuse. She explained how people with this condition often experience emotional dysregulation, dissociation, and a heightened fight-or-flight response. Lee argued that Rachel didn't act out of calculation that morning, she acted out of conditioned fear. The courtroom's tension peaked during Rachel's own testimony. She took the stand on the 3rd week of the trial, wearing a pale blue blouse and no makeup. Her hands trembled as she described her childhood, the beatings, the runaways, the day she finally left the last home and changed her name for good. When asked about the murder, her voice broke. She claimed she and Grant had argued. That he'd found her burner phone. That he accused her of being a con artist. That he threatened to expose her, to destroy her life. She said she panicked. That he lunged, or maybe he didn't. That everything went black. That when she came to, he was on the floor, and she was holding the knife. The cross-examination was brutal. Prosecutor Mendez tore through Rachel's version of events, pointing to inconsistencies, the lack of defensive wounds, the absence of any sign of struggle from Grant. She reminded the jury that Rachel didn't call 911 immediately. That she scrubbed the floor. That she planned to flee. Rachel didn't deny it. But she kept saying, "I wasn't thinking like a killer. I was just terrified." And then came the final shock. The prosecution introduced previously unreleased footage, security camera images from a gas station near the couple's home, taken just 1 week before the murder. It showed Rachel alone, withdrawing nearly $8,000 in cash from 3 different ATMs, wearing a dark hoodie and sunglasses. A map to Mexico was later found in her glove compartment. The courtroom gasped again. Even some jurors shifted uncomfortably. When closing arguments were delivered, both sides poured their souls into it. The prosecution demanded accountability. A man was dead, they argued. A kind man. A man who had built a life on trust, and had paid the ultimate price for loving a lie. The defense begged for mercy. They didn't ask the jury to absolve Rachel, they asked them to understand her. To see the wound beneath the woman. To consider that trauma doesn't excuse violence, but it may explain it. The jury deliberated for 9 days. On the afternoon of February 17, 2024, the courtroom was called back to session. The air was thick. Every seat was filled. Cameras flashed. The world watched. Rachel stood, her hands clenched at her sides. The foreperson read the verdict. Guilty. Of second-degree murder. Gasps erupted. Some wept. Others sighed in relief. Rachel did not cry. She only nodded once, as if she had already made peace with what was coming. At sentencing, the judge spoke directly to her. He acknowledged her past. Her pain. But reminded her that none of it justified the irreversible decision she made on that April morning. Rachel Hastings was sentenced to 34 years to life in prison, with eligibility for parole after 28. Outside the courthouse, the public reaction was immediate and divided. Some held signs calling her a monster. Others called her a martyr. The internet lit up with debates. #Justice for Grant trended alongside #FreeRachelHastings. Grant's family expressed relief. His sister, Melissa, told reporters, "We didn't get our brother back. But we got the truth." As for Rachel, she was led away in cuffs, her future now reduced to a prison number and a past she could no longer escape. But in quiet corners of online forums, people still wondered, who was the man in those photographs? Was he just a shadow of a forgotten life? Or a ghost still waiting to be discovered? And so, the verdict was delivered. Justice, in the eyes of the court, was done. But some stories, especially the ones built on lies, loss, and the fragile search for belonging, don't end with a gavel. They just go quiet, until something else brings them roaring back. If this story moved you, hit subscribe, tap like, and share it with someone who believes in uncovering the truth, no matter how dark it gets.